Make every night a wonderful journey, no matter where you are. Good night, sweet dreams. The first story. End of the line. My name is Gerald. I'm a truck driver. I work for the North American Transport Company NATCO. I normally make runs up into southern Canada, but this time was different. My boss had asked me to make a run up north, way north. It was further than I normally went, but the boss was offering me double overtime for this one run, saying it was for a really important client normally. I would have put up more of a fight, as I like to stick to my schedule, but I really needed the money. The run was mostly uneventful, and went by rather quickly, as I seemed to be riding lighter than normal. The boss hadn't let me check the cargo, saying I didn't have time. Oh well, not really important to me anyway. After a good while on the road, it started to snow. Visibility was almost zero. By the time I got to my destination, the stop was at a bar grill aptly named the End of the Line. I went inside to find the owner inside. I found a strange group of people, dressed funny, like from the olden days. Come to think of it, the place looked kind of old too. Well, it did take forever for new stuff to make it all the way up here, I figured. I went and talked to the barkeep, but he told me that the owner was out and would be back shortly, and why not sit down for a bit while I waited. I figured it couldn't hurt anything, and I was getting hungry for something besides what I had brought along with me. A tablet hanging on the wall behind the bar declared today's special to be the best damn sandwich ever, and a side of fries for $5. I decided to give it a shot, and told the barkeep to give me one. What he put out in front of me made me grimace. Before me was a sandwich on plain white bread, filled with mustard, mayonnaise, ketchup, onions, tomatoes, pickles, and a whole bunch of other condiments that seemed ready to burst out from between the slices, and all of it was centered around a thick slab of meat that defied identification. I almost turned it down, but I had already paid, and years of living on truck stop fare had given me a cast iron stomach. I bit down into the soggy sandwich and nearly choked. It was the best damn sandwich ever, and the fries weren't half bad. I ate it like ravenous gator after a chicken, and the sandwich disappeared far more quickly than I would have hoped. I asked the barkeep what had been in it, but he said it was a secret. I was a bit annoyed at first, but then I realized how silly that was. It was probably some kind of local animal I had just never tasted before. I decided that, since the proprietor had yet to return, that I would finally go check on the cargo when I got to the truck. However, I got very confused now why I'd seemed to be riding so light. The trailer was empty. At first, I thought that maybe some local had pilfered my cargo while I was goofing off, but there was no sign of it. I decided to call my boss and get to the bottom of this. When he picked up the phone, he seemed genuinely surprised to hear me, and kept dodging the question of what had become of the cargo. Finally, I decided that I had enough and hung up. I climbed in the cab of the truck and turned around, determined to get back to base as soon as I could. Let us just see that weasel squirm his way out of a conversation when we were face to face. After about 15 minutes on the road, I came to a dead end. I had apparently missed the turn in the snow, so I turned around to check the way. After about a minute, I saw the red neon sign of the End of the Line grill. That was the last straw. I got on the phone to base, and after a few tries I managed to get through. "What do you want now, Gerald?" he asked on the other end. "Damn it, Jackson, you weasel. There was nothing in the trailer the whole way up here. meaning you wasted all my time for nothing. And don't even think about trying to weasel out of paying me, or I'll skin you alive. And on top of that, this damn snow keeps getting me turned around. I can't get out of this place when I get back to base. We are gonna have us a little talk. Well, of course, you can't leave Jerry. These people paid good money for that cargo, so you can't just drive off with it, Jackson replied calmly on the other end. What the hell are you talking about, Jackson? There was no cargo in that trailer. Who said anything about the trailer? That was just there to keep you from getting suspicious. Suspicious of what? Of the nature of your cargo. What in the hell are you talking about, you? And it dawned on me. He was talking about me. I was the cargo. What kind of sick shit was he trying to pull? I decided to get in the truck and try the highway again. But what I saw next made my blood run cold. The people in the bar were staring at me through the window. Their eyes were glowing red. I jumped in the cabin Gundy for the highway. After about 20 minutes, though, I noticed a red glow in front of me and stopped the truck. There, in the snow, was the end of the line. Preparing to back up and turn around, I saw something in the mirror that made my heart stop. In my rearview mirror was the red neon sign at the end of the line. That's when it dawned on me. I knew what the secret ingredient in the end of the line Bar Grill's world famous best damn sandwich ever was. I thought to myself as the red-eyed patron circled the truck. I wonder what his name was. The second story. I used to be fearless. I used to be fearless. Horror movies never really scared me. Scary books had no effect. Haunted houses are meaningless. I was never a child who slept with the covers over their face, or with a night light. As a little girl, I never felt the need to crawl into bed with my mother after having a nightmare. I never really had nightmares to begin with, and the few I did have, most people would never consider a nightmare at all. I've simply never been afraid of what goes bump in the night. Our home security system kept away fears of very real humans with dark intentions, as did our Rottweiler, aptly named Killer. As for threats outside the home, well, who could be afraid in a nice, white, upper-class community? I've lived in a bland bubble all my life, never knowing what fear is, so why should I ever be afraid of the dark? Up until this moment, I haven't been. I saw it as childish and illogical, of course. I don't feel that way anymore. I'm writing this to you now as a warning because it's too late for me. I know that now, and it's brought on a surreal sort of calm. When I finish warning you, it will be all over, so forgive me if I'm being long-winded. I enjoyed life a bit more than I was once willing to admit. It all started with what I thought was a virus. I had been linked to a video called Girls and Boys Come Out to Play. It sounded harmless enough. I thought it was an art student's film. Perhaps the person who had linked the video promised it was very good, well worth watching. I can't remember the video. All I can remember is the feeling it brought up. It wasn't fear, but it was close. I was uncomfortable. I was unnerved. I was also vaguely ill. From then on, things only got worse. The background on my computer had changed to a picture of a disturbed-looking young woman who stared at me from a black abyss. Every now and then, and growing more frequent by the day, strange noises would emit from my computer, even when the sound wasn't on. Screaming, strange laughter, grinding noises. At the time, I was annoyed. The fear hadn't settled in quite yet. Then, the faces started popping up, like those ridiculous screamers that scared my friends in high school. Yet these they looked real. They were the faces of the dead, and they had died violent deaths. I wish I could say that I stopped using the computer, but I couldn't. My job requires me to use my computer frequently. What was I to do? I had no other computer available to me. I tried to take it and have the virus removed, but no one could help me. They said there wasn't a virus. They said the computer was fine. Meanwhile, it got worse. The faces weren't just popping up. They would stay, and with those horrible, rotted eyes, they would hold my gaze. I couldn't look away from them and their terrible, mocking grins. And oh, God, the smell. My computer forever had a vague stench of death around it. I thought I was going crazy. I thought that perhaps someone was messing with me. The people at the computer repair place didn't know what they were talking about. Something was wrong, but I knew that it had to be something very real that just had to be fixed. So I got a new computer. Everything was fine for a while, but then it all came back, and in full force. Now there were voices. Now there was screaming. Now the rotted faces showed their stinking bodies. I could see every maggot, every fly, every pus-filled crevice, and they were calling to me, telling me that soon, very soon, I'd be joining them. They were so hungry that I had tried to get rid of them, and now they would make me pay. I didn't know what to do. Ignoring the problem wasn't working. I thought maybe it was the fault of a friend from work. Perhaps it came from the emails they had been sending me. I never thought it was the video, not for a second after all. That just wasn't logical. I was at the end of my rope. Today, I unplugged the computer and began packing. I would go on vacation, clear my head, and pray that everything would be back to normal. A few minutes ago, I realized it would not. The power went out, and for the first time in my life, I felt true fear. I had no idea that in a few moments, it would become mind-numbing. I stumbled through the house, looking for a flashlight, when I saw that something was still giving off light. The computer, the unplugged computer, was on, and the woman in the background was moving, beckoning me over. I couldn't help myself. I sat down across from her with the darkness caving in all around me, and then the woman, like all of the other images I've seen before, began to rot away. The whole scene rotted away, and then the screen went black, and without light, without a means of seeing my reflection, I saw her behind me for the briefest of moments, a bloody and rusted knife in hand. The computer came back to life, and my old background had returned. But I know it's not over, so I've decided to come here. I know you all like to be scared, right? Well, take it from someone who has only very recently known fear. It's not always worth it, and not everything is fun and games. Of course, you probably won't believe me. Why should you? The thing, I guess I haven't been completely honest with you. There was no video, it was a story. A story quite similar to this one, though with subtle plot differences, and perhaps better storytelling. I know all of you like stories that might give you a good scare. That's probably why you started reading mine. Now that you've read this, you'll share my fate. I know it's cruel and perhaps unfair, but it has to be done. I just hope that you can take comfort in knowing that when I'm the woman haunting your computer, I'll be a bit more gentle if I can. I'll use a blade that's a little less dull. Pictures of those who came before us who were a little less grotesque. Sounds that are a little less alarming. But then again, you do like to be scared, right? Don't worry. I won't ask you to repost this story 5 times. Nothing will save you after all. Nothing could save me. The power is still out, and I know, behind me, the woman is waiting for me. I'll see you very soon. Goodbye for now. The 3rd story. The White Door. For as long as I can remember, I've been a huge fan of classic animation. As a boy, I would collect VHS tapes of animated movies and spent countless days watching them, whether or not I want to admit it. These films were a huge part of my life. Everything changed when I was about 9 on one fateful trip to my great-grandmother's house. My great-grandmother had an enormous conglomeration of tapes in her attic, complete with an area to view them by the attic stairs. An old TV set hooked up to a VHS player with a mattress in front. The perfect place to watch movies. I can recall only a handful of times we went to her house, but one visit sticks out in particular. It's when I watched that movie. One evening I was nosing around in her attic, looking through her movie collection for some animated movie I had never seen before. Every title was familiar, and I considered watching Ferngully until I noticed a tape resting on the top shelf. It was without a cover, and the only marking on it was a sticker that read The White Door. I had never heard of this movie excitedly. I popped the video in the player and got comfortable. I had no idea what I was in for. The movie started off with victorious fanfare and a panning shot of some crimson-colored clouds. As the clouds drifted past the screen, the music got more and more cheerful until the clouds eventually raced off screen, revealing the title of the movie. Placed in the sky were massive golden letters that read The White Door. From the looks of the animation and quality of the music, I would guess the movie was made in the late 80s. The title sequence faded away, and the opening scene began with a small, blonde-haired boy wandering through darkness until he came across a massive white door. He stopped before it and gazed upward curiously, examining the colossal entryway. The door opened, and heavenly light poured in all around him. With a hand over his eyes, he slowly ventured inside. Harp music presented the scene as the boy crept through the doors. The entire screen was overtaken by bright white light. The scene faded back, and to reveal the boy standing in a plateau of white, purple, and pink clouds. He was dressed in a white robe and had very small wings protruding from his back. It was, of course, implied that the boy had died. I was slightly taken back by this. Why had he died? This concept seemed a little too dark for an animated children's movie. The small angel boy looked around, searching for some explanation as to his whereabouts. The music had long since gone away, and the movie cycled through various shots of the boy, slowly walking around looking for any sign that he was not alone. He stopped searching and looked down at his feet. "I'm all alone," he said on the verge of tears. "I don't know where everybody is and I'm all alone." The boy began crying. "I want to go home," he yelled several times, crying more and more with each pitiful shout. His crying was disturbingly realistic. He sat down on the ground and began bawling. "I want to go home." I felt a chill race up my spine. This child was in agony, absolutely alone in what was supposed to be paradise. The boy's wailing was interrupted when a small brown dog ran by, grabbing his attention immediately. His tears were dried and he began to follow the dog, cheering Chester. "I can't believe you're here, Chester." He skipped and laughed as he attempted to catch his pet, but the dog always seemed to be just out of reach. It may have been my imagination, but I noticed something strange. In the background there were clouds decorating the back scenery. Blacked out, as not to distract the viewer, but some of these soft shapes looked abnormal. As the boy ran, the clouds started to look like distant human silhouettes, silently watching him. The boy finally caught up to the dog and leapt forward, hoping to greet him with a loving hug. As soon as the boy touched the animal, he realized that it was merely a cloud that resembled a dog. It burst into little white puffs. She began crying again, this time louder, and clearly more heartbroken. He truly was alone. He continued weeping, and did not seem to notice what happened next. A deep voice chimed in, offering this simple statement: "You know he cannot come with you." The screen immediately cut to black, and the film began spewing a gentle noise. It sounded like gears grinding together, but I could only barely hear it. I really should have turned the TV off at that point. I wanted to so very badly, but I could not move. My legs were glued to the floor and my eyes were transfixed on the screen. I simply had to see what was going to happen next. In an instant, the sound of gears cut away, and the next scene began. The rich colors were intoxicating, and I found myself gawking at the sheer aesthetic beauty of this bizarre movie. A massive, beautiful tree overlooked a green field, and the same angel boy sat underneath it. Harp music was playing, the same as before, but this time it sounded less heavenly. Perhaps it was a sneaking suspicion as to what I was about to behold, but the music seemed foreboding. The great tree, as the boy called it, was listening to the boy's woes with great attendance, and spoke back to him. The tree's voice was, for a lack of a better word, creepy. It makes me shudder just to think about it. I really cannot explain it. It was one of the weirdest things I've ever heard. The tree would sway from side to side and speak in a quiet, muffled voice that was almost impossible to fully hear. It sounded like a man's voice stretched to an impossibly high pitch, but muffled through some thick object. I couldn't understand a single word he said, but the angel boy heard everything. They shared a seemingly mild conversation, as the boy asked simple questions about where he was and what happened to his family. With each of the great tree's responses, the boy would lower his head in sadness, as if he were accepting some morbid fact. I was curious about the significance of this scene. Was the tree supposed to be God or some other heavenly being? There was no clarification toward any of the pressing questions that perpetually plagued my mind. After the great tree had answered all of his questions, he began talking continuously. He was babbling on about something that apparently angered him, because the child stood up from where he was seated and slowly walked back from the tree. He wore a look of paranoia, as if he were afraid the tree would lash out toward him at any moment. Suddenly there was a new perspective. The camera gradually zoomed in on a shot of the tree, alone, slowly swaying back and forth. He was talking very calmly, from what I could hear, and his voice sounded foggy and distant. The boy began crying again. His wails heard from off the screen. His weeping slowly evolved into pain-induced screams, and he was shouting as loud as he could, "Stop it! Please stop! Help me!" My blood ran cold. This was the sound of a child being beaten. With every passing second the boy was screaming louder, but the tree kept its calm disposition while gently swaying back and forth. I couldn't see the boy, but hearing him cry for help was unbearable. I was nearly in tears at this point, and I didn't want to watch anymore. I got up to turn off the TV, but as soon as I moved, the screen went black and started playing the familiar grinding gears noise. This time, it was considerably louder amongst the loud metallic sound. I noticed a subtle oddity. I thought I could hear a very quiet voice whispering something, but any indication of this was drowned out by the loud gears. What awaited me in the next scene shook me to the core. Without any graceful transition, the next scene forced itself into the movie, as if it was not intended to be there. Distorted music was playing at inconsistent volumes, and the entire color scheme was off. Something was seriously wrong. Suddenly the music stopped. The boy was lying on the ground, arms crossed on his chest. His eyes were closed, and his face looked hollow all around his body. Roses perched out of the ground, arranged in a neat little circle. The roses grew noticeably quick. In a matter of seconds, the roses were a few feet high, but all the while the child did not move. There was no life in him. The only sound was the occasional ominous piano note. Punctuating the silence, the roses grew very high, but all at once would go back to being small. Restarting the cycle, the boy remained motionless. I was horrified. I watched with tear-filled eyes, cupping my hand over my mouth. In the last few seconds of the scene, the tree's muffled voice broke in, saying something I simply could not understand, and just as abruptly as it began, the scene closed with a cut to block. The same rusty gears made their painful sound, but the noise was unbearably loud and accompanied by a loud sweeping voice. It only lasted for a few seconds, and the entire time I struggled to comprehend what the voice was saying. Then, in the last second, I knew exactly what it was saying. "He's coming." The tape reached its end, and I was left staring at a blue stop screen. I didn't do anything for a few minutes. The floor was vicked into my glazed-over stare. Eventually, I came to my senses and sneaked back downstairs. I didn't want to talk to anybody about this, because I just didn't want to think about it. I tried to pretend it never happened. I cried myself to sleep that night, and many nights afterward the feeling was impossible to shake. I still think about that movie, with every detail so vividly etched in the back of my mind. Sometimes I wonder if I ever watched it at all. Was I dreaming? Did it ever happen? Occasionally, I wake up in the middle of the night hearing distant whispers. Every single time it's the same thing. "He's coming." Credited to Grant 10.